5-year-old head. The problem with knowing too much too soon. Let me start with a small story. A 5-year-old looks up at you, very serious, very confident, and asks, "Can I drive the car?" You don't laugh. You don't get angry. You don't say no because the child is bad. You say no because timing matters. The child can reach the wheel. They understand what a car is. They've watched adults do it 1,000 times. But knowledge without maturity isn't power. It's risk. Knowledge without maturity isn't power. It's risk. And that single idea, simple enough for a child, is quietly sitting underneath this entire book. Because look back at what we've walked through together. Ancient visitors? Advanced tools that shouldn't exist? Impossible structures? Silent watchers? A universe that stopped talking? At first glance, it all looks like secrets being hidden from us. But what if that framing is backwards? What if nothing was hidden and we were simply too early? I know what you're thinking. That sounds like an excuse. Maybe, but stay with me because this is where all the pieces finally sit in the same room. When you look at early human history, what stands out isn't just sudden knowledge. It's selective knowledge. We didn't get starships. We didn't get immortality. We didn't get unlimited energy with instructions stapled to it. We got agriculture, math, astronomy, stone that moved when it shouldn't. Enough to grow. Not enough to dominate. Enough to learn patterns. Not enough to rewrite reality. That's not how you treat equals. That's how you treat students, and when students misuse what they're given. You don't give them more. You step back. You let consequences teach what instructions cannot. That reframes everything. The ancient teachers didn't vanish mysteriously. The builders didn't fail. The watchers didn't abandon us. They stopped holding the bike. Because the goal was never to impress us. It was to see whether we could grow without being supervised forever. Think about our own moment in history. We now have nuclear power, artificial intelligence, genetic editing, planet-scale influence. We can reshape ecosystems. We can rewrite code, both digital and biological. We can end civilizations with the push of a button. And the uncomfortable truth? Our emotional maturity has not kept pace. We argue like children with grown-up tools. We compete faster than we cooperate. We optimize for speed, not wisdom. Which brings us back to the car. Imagine giving the keys anyway. Not because the child earned them, but because they asked loudly enough. That's not generosity. That's negligence. So here's the quiet, unsettling possibility this chapter opens with. What if the universe isn't withholding knowledge from us? What if it already gave us enough and is waiting to see whether we can handle it? What if the silence we keep interpreting as absence is actually restraint? Not because no one cares, but because someone cares too much to intervene again before we learn the lesson we keep skipping, and suddenly, the entire book tilts. The question stops being, did ancient visitors exist? And becomes something far more uncomfortable. If they did, would we want them to come back right now? Sit with that. Because maybe the greatest mystery isn't why the universe went quiet. Maybe it's why we keep assuming we're ready for it to speak again. Brilliant hands, unsteady balance. Before we talk about the future, or visitors, or silence, or adulthood, we need to take an honest look in the mirror. Not a dramatic one. Not a judgmental one. Just a clear one. Right now, humanity can do things that would have looked like magic to every civilization that came before us. We can split atoms. Not metaphorically. Literally. We can edit genes, reach into the code of life, and rewrite sentences that evolution spent millions of years composing. We can create artificial minds. Machines that learn. Systems that adapt. Programs that surprise even their creators. We've put machines on other planets. We've seen the beginning of the universe. We've mapped the inside of the human brain. From a tool's perspective, we're extraordinary, and yet, we still struggle with cooperation. We still organize ourselves into camps that treat disagreement like threat. We still prioritize short-term wins over long-term survival. We still know how to build power faster than we know how to restrain it. My observation, we're brilliant at tools. And terrible at consequences. This isn't an insult, it's a developmental snapshot. Because intelligence doesn't mature all at once. It grows unevenly, hence first, then language, then empathy, then restraint, much later. And if you step back and look at us with that lens, a familiar pattern emerges. We're curious, endlessly curious. We touch things we shouldn't touch just to see what happens. We ask what if before we ask should we. We're powerful in short bursts. We invent something incredible, then spend decades figuring out what damage it accidentally caused. We're emotionally reactive. Fear spreads faster than understanding. Outrage travels further than nuance. We punish before we reflect. And when something goes wrong, our first instinct isn't to slow down. It's to build a better hammer. This is what the book has been quietly pointing to the whole time. Not that humanity is bad, but that humanity is young. The 5-year-old head isn't stupid. It's not evil. It's not hopeless. It's smart, quick, creative, and deeply unaware of how much damage it can do with the wrong toy. A 5-year-old doesn't lack intelligence. They lack context. They don't feel the long arc of consequence yet. They don't intuit systems bigger than themselves. They don't understand that some actions can't be undone. That's why supervision exists. Not to punish curiosity, but to keep curiosity from becoming catastrophe. So ask the question gently, without sarcasm. Does that sound like a species ready for cosmic adulthood? A species that can destroy its own habitat, create intelligence it doesn't fully understand, rewrite its own biology, while still arguing about basic responsibility? This doesn't mean we're doomed. It means we're early. And suddenly, so many things we've talked about make sense. Why help was limited. Why instruction came without full explanation. Why the watchers stepped back. Why the universe feels quiet. Because adulthood isn't granted by intelligence alone. It's earned through restraint, through the ability to say, we could, but we won't. Not yet. And that's the skill we're still practicing. Right now, humanity feels like a teenager with access to a laboratory, capable of brilliance, capable of disaster, still figuring out the difference. Which brings us to the uncomfortable realization sitting beneath this entire chapter. If there are others out there, older, quieter, more disciplined, they wouldn't be waiting for us to get smarter. They'd be waiting for us to get wiser. And wisdom doesn't arrive with a breakthrough. It arrives slowly, after mistakes, after consequences, after learning when to put the keys down. So maybe the question isn't why the universe hasn't welcomed us yet. Maybe it's whether we'd recognize the moment when we finally become the kind of species that wouldn't need to be told no anymore. Because that's what adulthood looks like. Not unlimited freedom, but knowing what not to touch, even when no one is stopping you. So, are we just children forever? Let's stop here for a moment, because I know what you're thinking. This framing, this idea of humanity as young, unfinished, supervised, it can sting. It feels humbling. It pokes at our sense of exceptionalism. It can sound, at first blush, like an insult dressed up as philosophy. Now you might be thinking, so what, are we failures? No. Not at all. That reaction makes sense. We've spent centuries telling ourselves a very specific story, that we are the pinnacle, that intelligence culminated here, that consciousness reached its final form when it reached us. So being told, you're not done yet, can feel like being demoted. But that's only true if you misunderstand what childhood actually is. Childhood isn't a flaw, it's a phase, a necessary one. No species starts fully formed. No mind emerges complete. No civilization wakes up wise. Growth always looks awkward from the inside. Think about a child learning to speak. They don't start with poetry, they stumble. They misuse words. They say things that are technically impressive and socially disastrous. But you don't judge them for that, you guide them. You protect them from themselves, sometimes, until they can protect others. So ask the question gently, would you judge a child for not being an adult, or guide them toward becoming one? This framing doesn't say humanity is doomed. It says humanity is developing. And development is messy. You learn by overshooting, by touching hot things once, by discovering that just because you can doesn't mean you should. If you look at our history through that lens, it stops being embarrassing. It becomes intelligible. The wars, the cycles of collapse, the repeated rediscovery of the same ethical lessons. That's not failure. That's learning, slowly, painfully, without a teacher hovering over your shoulder anymore. And here's the part we often miss. Childhood is not endless. It ends when a being learns restraint without supervision. When they internalize responsibility. When they don't need an external authority to say, stop. That's what adulthood actually is. Not mastery of tools. Not intelligence. Not power. But the ability to hold power without immediately using it. Seen this way, the silence we keep interpreting as rejection looks different. It doesn't say, "You're not worthy," it says, "Grow." And growth doesn't come from being told you're special. It comes from being trusted to figure things out and to live with the consequences. So no, this story doesn't trap us in eternal childhood. It does the opposite. It implies there's a next stage. One we haven't reached yet. One that doesn't arrive with fireworks or first contact or cosmic applause. It arrives quietly. When a species learns to pause, to think long-term, to act as if someone else will have to live with the world it leaves behind. That's not a small achievement. That's the hardest one. And maybe that's why the universe feels so patient. Because patience isn't indifference. It's confidence that growth, if it happens at all, can't be rushed. Which leaves us with a final, softer thought to sit with. Maybe humanity isn't being judged. Maybe we're being waited on. Not because we're inadequate, but because becoming something worthy of lasting company takes time. And the story isn't over just because we haven't reached the last chapter yet. The moment the training wheels come off, something subtle has already changed, not announced, not celebrated. Not even fully noticed, but it's happening. For most of our history, humanity looked outward with hunger. We wanted contact, confirmation, proof that we weren't alone. We broadcast, we shouted. We waved into the dark. Now, quietly, we're doing something different. We're scanning exoplanets. We're analyzing atmospheres for chemical imbalance. We're listening more than we're speaking. We're looking for signs of life the way someone looks for a reflection. Carefully, respectfully, without knocking too hard. At some point, every student becomes a teacher, not because they know everything, but because someone newer is watching. And that's the moment this book has been circling. Because the biggest shift isn't technological. It's positional. For the first time in our history, humanity is starting to imagine itself on the other side of the equation, not the discovered. The discoverer, not the observed. The observer. And the moment you stand there, really stand there, the universe starts to feel very different. The mirror turn. Let's ask the question we avoided for most of the book. If we found life today, real life, not bacteria, not fossils, a developing civilization, cities just forming, tools emerging, language stabilizing, what would we do? Would we intervene? Give them technology they don't understand? Solve problems they haven't learned from yet? Would we announce ourselves? Land, reveal, change their story forever? Or would we observe? Study quietly, protect from a distance. Let them grow into their choices? Would we wait? And if so, how long? Until they stop fighting each other? Until they stop poisoning their planet? Until they learn restraint? This is where the dark forest flips. It stops being a threat. It becomes a test. Maybe the question was never, why are they silent? Maybe it's, when would we choose silence? Because silence isn't fear when it's chosen deliberately, it's responsibility. And suddenly, the ancient behavior we've been interpreting as abandonment looks eerily familiar. If we were the advanced ones, if we had learned the hard lessons, if we understood how easily interference can derail growth, we wouldn't rush in either. We'd hesitate. We'd argue. We'd debate ethics for decades. We'd worry about unintended consequences. We'd say things like, they're not ready. We don't know what this would do to them. We might do more harm than good. And in that hesitation, we'd accidentally recreate the very silence that once confused us. The responsibility threshold. This is where everything finally locks together. The tools dot the knowledge. The infrastructure. The code. The silence. Giza wasn't just engineering. It was calibration, precision, without explanation. Sumer wasn't just myth. It was instruction knowledge framed as teaching. The megaliths weren't just monuments. They were infrastructure, global systems without manuals. DNA wasn't just biology. It was capacity, potential waiting for context. And the dark forest wasn't just fear. It was restraint, learned the hard way. All of it points to a single threshold. The moment when curiosity turns into stewardship. When intelligence stops asking, can we, and starts asking, should we? That's the real line between childhood and adulthood. Not space travel, not energy mastery, not artificial minds, but restraint without supervision. Because the universe doesn't reward cleverness, it survives wisdom. And here's the uncomfortable truth. We're approaching that threshold now. We can already alter life. We can already shape intelligence. We can already influence planets. Soon, very soon, we'll be forced to decide what kind of observers we are. Do we rush in? Do we extract? Do we announce ourselves because we're excited? Or do we pause? Do we consider that discovery is not neutral? That being seen changes trajectories? That our presence might become their mythology? This is the moment the training wheels come off. Not because someone removed them, but because we no longer need to be told not to fall. And the universe, if it's watching, wouldn't announce that moment. It wouldn't celebrate it. It would simply wait, because the final test of intelligence isn't whether you can reach the stars. It's whether once you can, when to keep your distance. And if that's true, then the silence we feared for so long might not be a warning, it might be an invitation. Not to speak, but to grow into the kind of presence that doesn't need to. Breaking less, not knowing more. This is usually where books like this start predicting things. Dates, revelations, contact scenarios, grand finales. We're not doing that. Because growing up doesn't arrive with a prophecy. It arrives quietly in habits, in priorities, in what a species chooses not to do. So let's talk about what maturity might actually look like without pretending we can see the ending. First, long-term thinking. Not 5 years, not election cycles, not quarterly returns, generational thinking. Decisions made with people in mind who don't exist yet. The ability to ask, what kind of world does this create a century from now? That's not intelligence. That's patience. Second, restraint over dominance. Childhood equates power with control. Adulthood learns that control breaks systems. A mature civilization doesn't ask how much it can take. It asks how much it should leave. It understands that the strongest move is often the one you don't make. Third, curiosity without conquest. Exploration without extraction. Discovery without ownership. The realization that learning about something doesn't require changing it. That just because you can reach somewhere doesn't mean you have to plant a flag there. Fourth, technology paired with ethics. Not ethics as an afterthought. Not ethics as damage control. Ethics as part of the design. Built in, not bolted on. Tools developed alongside the question, what happens if this is misused? And then deciding whether to build it anyway. Adulthood isn't about knowing more. It's about breaking less. This version of growth isn't flashy. It doesn't dominate headlines. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels boring. And that might be the clearest sign of all, because reckless phases are loud. Mature ones are stable. They don't announce themselves. They simply work. If humanity is moving toward anything, it's not a single moment of enlightenment. It's a gradual shift from reaction to reflection, from urgency to deliberation, from asking, what can we do next, to asking, what deserves to be done at all. And here's the quiet truth this entire book has been circling. If there are others out there, older, quieter, more disciplined, they wouldn't recognize us by our inventions. They'd recognize us by our restraint. By the moment we stop treating the universe like a puzzle to solve and start treating it like a place we're responsible for. That's what growing up actually looks like, not answers. Not applause. Just fewer broken things left behind in our wake, and the steady, unglamorous choice to become a presence worth noticing, only after we've learned how not to be a dangerous one. No one is coming to finish it for us. This is usually the part where a book like this pulls something dramatic out of its pocket. A revelation, a disclosure, a signal received. A ship on the horizon. That's not happening here. Not because it couldn't, but because it shouldn't. There's no final proof in these pages. No confirmation stamped at the end. No arrival timed perfectly for the last chapter. And that's not a failure of storytelling. It's the point. My explanation. A story about growing up shouldn't end with someone else showing up to save you. Because if someone did, if a higher intelligence landed, explained everything, solved our problems, the story wouldn't be about humanity anymore. It would be about dependency. Every mystery we've explored, the ancient knowledge, the tools that appeared too early, the silence that followed, all of it points in the same direction. Toward handover, not rescue. The teachers step back. The observers withdraw. The answers stop arriving from the outside, not because the lesson failed, but because the lesson moved inside. This isn't a cliffhanger. It's a mirror. The absence of a final reveal isn't teasing you. It's asking something of you. Because the moment someone else arrives with certainty, this stops being a story about responsibility and becomes a story about authority. And authority is comfortable. Responsibility is not. So the story ends here not because there's nothing left to say, but because the next chapter can't be written by an author. It has to be written by a species. In choices made quietly. In technologies delayed or abandoned. In restraint practiced when no one is watching. If the universe has been silent, maybe it's because this is the part where we're supposed to speak to ourselves instead. And decide who we are without anyone else grading the paper. That's not abandonment. That's adulthood. So this book doesn't close with answers. It closes with ownership. Because if the story is really about growing up, then the ending was never going to arrive from the stars. It was always going to arrive the moment we realized no one else was coming to finish it for us. Standing under the sky without instructions. Imagine this. You're standing outside at night. No phone, no notifications. No explanation scrolling past. Just the sky. Stars scattered without labels. Distances so large they refuse to make sense. Silence that doesn't rush to comfort you. No answers arrive. No voice says, here's what it all means. No signal confirms you're doing it right. Just possibility. Maybe the universe didn't go quiet because it lost interest. Maybe it went quiet because it was our turn to speak. Not with radios, not with probes. Not with declarations of cleverness, but with behavior, with restraint, with care. With the slow, unglamorous work of becoming something stable enough to last. This whole book has been a long walk toward that moment. We looked back at ancient knowledge that arrived too complete. At tools that appeared before the hands were ready. At structures that outlived their builders. At silence that followed instruction. And every time the same pattern whispered underneath. Help, then distance. Guidance, then withdrawal. Teaching, then watching. Not punishment, trust, because real trust doesn't hover. It steps back and lets you decide who you are when no one is correcting you anymore. Standing under the sky like this, without instructions, feels uncomfortable. Children hate that feeling. They ask, what do I do next? Am I allowed to? Is this right? Adults learn to sit with uncertainty. They learn that not knowing doesn't mean not being capable. It means being responsible. Responsible for the choices that come next. Responsible for the world those choices create. Responsible for what kind of presence they become when no one is supervising. That's where humanity is now. Not abandoned, not alone, not finished, just unsupervised for the first time. And that's terrifying. But it's also the moment growth actually begins. Because the question is no longer, what are we allowed to know? It's, what kind of species do we choose to be? Do we rush to dominate what we discover? Do we extract before we understand? Do we speak loudly because silence makes us nervous? Or do we learn to listen to each other, to consequences, to the quiet feedback of a universe that doesn't interrupt us anymore? If there are others out there, older, quieter, more patient, they wouldn't be waiting for us to invent faster engines. They'd be waiting for us to demonstrate something much rarer, the ability to hold power without immediately using it. The ability to know and wait. So the book ends here. Not with answers, not with proof. Not with a final revelation descending from the sky. It ends with a human moment. Someone standing under the stars. No instructions in hand. No one to blame. No one to impress. Just choice. Whether humanity was guided, observed, or left entirely on its own, one truth remains. We are no longer just the children asking questions. We are becoming the ones whose answers will shape what comes next. And somewhere out there, the universe may be listening, not to what we say, but to who we become